name is Ismael Sanchez Morales. I'm the Curator of Anthropology at the museum, and we are really, really pleased to be hosting the second talk of the Thrive Speaker Series at the AZMNH. Before we get started, we want to acknowledge that the city of Mesa is located on the traditional lands of the O'odham, known as Pima, and the Pipash, known as Maricopa, and we offer our respects to honor their legacy and heritage. So the Thrive Speaker Series is part of the programming associated with our newest exhibit called Thrive, the First People Yesterday, Today, and Forever. And the Thrive exhibit explores the human and environmental histories of the Sonoran Desert, not only through archaeological science, but also through the traditional knowledge of tribal representatives. If you haven't seen the Thrive exhibit, I really, really encourage you to go and explore it right after the talk. This exhibit opened back in January and is going to be open until August 17 of this year. So tonight we are really, really excited and honored to have Dr. Christopher Caseldine as our invited speaker. Chris is an assistant research professor and curator of collections in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change at Arizona State University. Chris's research focuses on ancient irrigation management and control and the archaeology of central and southern Arizona. Additionally, he oversees a multi-semester museum training program to contribute to ongoing NACPRA efforts at his department and providing students with career-ready skills. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Caseldine.
Thank you.
And just before Chris starts with the talk, I just want to remind you that we have a sign-in sheet for this event. If you don't mind signing it, that will really, really help us in keeping track of how successful these kinds of events are at the museum. So I'm going to pass it around. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Good evening. How's everybody? Doing good? Can everybody hear me? Should I use a microphone? I hate microphones. All right, so I'm also not a big technology person, but during this presentation, there will be your all's participation. So you will need a smartphone. There's prizes involved by participating, maybe. So I begin with this, and in a minute I'll get to why I use Ancestral O'Odham instead of Hohokam anymore. But I like this drawing. This is of, and I'll get to this in a minute, formerly or commonly known as Los Muertos. This is U956 ASM. That's the name I will be using it with it, or U956. And I'll get to why in a second. But I like this because it integrates or shows you kind of Chandler surrounding U956 in the fields and showing that Phoenix has a long history. There's this myth, as an undergraduate, I read about the history of the Southwest. And the Southwest started in 1900 a bit-ish, that culture was considered to be opera houses and things like that. What I'm going to be talking about today goes back way beyond that, and it didn't just start when Euro-Americans got here. So I'll begin with a discussion of terminology. Then I'll shift into the discussion of developmental history of ancient irrigation along the Lower Salt River. This includes an extremely large flood, so stay on your edge of your seats for that. Standard irrigation units, kind of the way irrigation was organized at this field level. Then irrigation as an institution. So this is a way I look at irrigation, that it's not just people doing things and bringing water to their crops, but it's a whole system that allows that to happen. And this is where you'll participate in a collective action game. And then finally, I'll talk about or discuss what Ancestral O'Odham irrigation tells us about irrigation management in the past, because the things that people were doing here in the past continue on today, and you see it around the world. So it's not a unique thing, but it is an amazing thing compared to most of us aren't farmers and we don't know how to actually irrigate. So many of you know this term, Hohokam. This is the term I learned when I was an undergraduate and really trying to understand the history of the area. I'm from Mesa, I grew up here. I had a vague idea of the Hohokam and who they were. At the time, I had no grasp of the communities that are around us. which I'll get to in a minute. And so I thought, oh, it's these past people that have gone away, they have disappeared. These things, when they were around, they had red on buff pottery, second ton red on buff. They had these huge canals. This is me right there. This is one of the main canals next to Sudabaki or Pueblo Grande. Gary Huckleberry is the one that took this photo, for those of you. He's a geoarchaeologist. I knew about ball courts, and then later about marketplace systems, the work of Dave Abbott, who was my advisor, my dissertation advisor, and then platform mounds. So you have these foundations of what I thought Hohokam were. There's also a lot of polychromes. But that is an interesting story, but not the story I'm telling today, because there's a far more interesting story that lasts through time. So here, this is something I share with my students. One of the first days we have an introduction to what is Hohokam, what is Ancestral O'Odham. What I'm showing here is the 22 tribes that have reservation land or community lands within Arizona. We have Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, Gila River Indian Community, Ak-Chin Indian Community, and Tohono O'odham Nation, who make up the 4 southern tribes of Arizona, who are the direct descendants of the Hohokam or Ancestral O'Odham. Additionally, you have Hopi and Zuni, who have an ancestral tie to the valley. So within my position, I've been wrestling with what term do I use, because I'm working actively with tribal historic preservation officers who see Hohokam as not just an archaeological term, but something that's portrays things about the past, about their ancestors, and makes it seem like their ancestors are gone and they have no tie to the land. And so, I mean, if we look at where this word Hohokam came from, it meant the ancients, that which has perished, those who have gone, vanished, gone, or all used up. And that's not what this actually means. Hugam are ancestors from today till in the past for O'odham people, as I've been told. And so, to me, we're talking about people that have their ancestors are here, the people are still here. So I've made a concerted effort to shift the way I talk about the ancient people here and use the term Ancestral O'odham. Along with that, you have sites. I want to make sure I say this correctly. So you have, I will be saying Sudabaki, so Central House instead of Pueblo Grande, or formerly known as Pueblo Grande. Chudog Muval Baki, or Blue Fly's House for Mesa Grande. And U956 ASM, or just simply U956 instead of Moros Mortos, because just the idea that a city was inhabited by dead people is just completely incorrect. It had to do with the archaeologists that were here in the 1800s and what they were doing. And so, as a reflection of that, I will not be using that term, except for one time about a pottery type. Despite that, this is considered the Hohokam region. So you're seeing all the way from the Gulf, really this is more, it's to the Gulf of California, all the way up north. And this is just a small portion of where Ancestral O'odham or people that were associated with Ancestral O'odham were in the past. But this is commonly how people know. I used to say, oh, the Hohokam region is larger than the state of South Carolina. That usually shocked people. Also, that South Carolina is about half the size of Arizona. That's another thing. So, although I'm using more updated terms, or I'm using different terms than we've used in the past, I'll still use the traditional or the standard chronology that we've always used archaeologically. So, pioneer, colonial, sedentary, Savano. I have a whole paper on this, or an article that came out recently in the Journal of Arizona, Journal of Arizona Archaeology, kind of talking about where does this name come from. There's also Brett Hill, who has a book called Hohokam, the Hohokam, which is very good. But for simplicity, I'm just going to be using this chronology. So, trying to understand where we are, we're about there. So, archaeologically, we know, or we believe, that irrigation within the valley started about AD 50. That's the earliest evidence that we have. during something called the Red Mountain phase. But that's not the beginning of irrigation. The beginning of irrigation within Arizona is down in Tucson, and that goes back to 1500 BC. So you're looking at canals that are almost as old as Mesoamerica, if not old, about the same age. This is also shortly after corn gets here, or maize. So you have a very, very long history of irrigation within Arizona, and then eventually we see evidence. It doesn't mean that there wasn't irrigation going on along the lower Salt River before then. It's just archaeologically, this is the earliest. There's some issues with just how deep really early deposits are, unlike Tucson. And so it may be that irrigation actually started much earlier here, but the evidence we have is AD 50. So in kind of the beginnings of irrigation systems, by irrigation system I mean multi-village systems. So you have people living in different settlements that are all coming together to work on and take water from the same canal. So you have Canal System 2 with Sudetbaki at the head gates. You have the Chrisman system, which is where Lehigh is. It may have been one or two canal systems. The head gates are pretty far apart. You have the Coyote system up north of the river, north of Lehigh. And then you have the Sedimento system, which more or less, as far as we can see, ends about the Price Freeway, so 101. Then this kind of shows you the pottery of the pioneer period. So you have Australia red on gray, Sweetwater, and then Snaketown red on buff or red on gray. It also shows you kind of the idea of what these villages may have looked like and how the villages were interspersed with the canals and the fields. So this being canals, you have fields out here, you have the classic pit house courtyard group, Ramada, and so on and so forth. And then, like here on South Mountain, there are numerous terraces with agave. Agave is extremely fascinating because every place that you look is genetically different. That's a different talk. Interesting enough, we know people were living in, so La Plaza is where ASU campus is now, and Los Hornos. We have evidence of people living in these two areas, but there isn't any evidence that we know of that there are canals at that point. So it seems like perhaps Los Hornos was participating much more, people living at Los Hornos were farming with terraces, and La Plaza being right next to quote-unquote Tempe Butte or Hayden Butte, there's known terraces on there as well. And they may have, and this is where, and I'll get to in a little bit, but this is where a bedrock reef is, where water is forced to the surface. So within the valley, right near ASU campus, is the area where the underflow is the closest to the surface. Not so much anymore because of all the groundwater pumping. But there was actually a mesquite bosque in this area, and the Salt River actually used to go south right here 5 million years ago. So, but we're not really quite sure what people were doing to subsist, but it seems like it might have been terracing in a little floodplain planting. So going into the colonial period, you have the two phases, Gila Butte and Santa Cruz. You see this expansion of irrigation. This is the amazing part. This is work done by Jerry Howard, who was a curator here many years ago, or a few years ago. And so we have this expansion of Canal System 2 before all the other systems. It was thought that irrigation was a step process, that you have a small canal, then a medium-sized canal, then you build a bigger canal, and so on and so forth, and then you get to this. This is about 1,000 years before you'd expect an irrigation system of this size to be around. Because if you look, well, at least it really don't come out. The Sedimento system, it's much smaller, but it is going out to La Plaza and Los Hornos. And then you still continue to have these really smaller canals at Chrisman system and Scottsdale system and Coyote there. It seems that they were pulling canals out to Shudog, Muval, Vaki. The the thing about dating this village is most of it was covered up by development early on. We have dates from the platform mound and then a mile away at the Mesa Cemetery, which is also U9-100, ASU. We don't actually know the developmental history of Sudog Muval Vaki. Unlike Sudovaki, which Sudovaki has been about 75% of it has been documented. So a lot of it's been documented. And we have a pretty good idea how the village changed through time. This is just, it's one pit house that we know here is dating the colonial. But what you're seeing is it's generally a gradual growth of irrigation, except for Canal System 2. So during my dissertation work, and largely this is coming from my dissertation work many, many years ago, I came upon, so this is actually coming from Jerry Howard. We were doing the Riverview project, and he had talked about this really thick flood layer, that it was sediment and it's unlike anything else that you see. Anything below this, this layer, the canals just stopped. They didn't rebuild the canals. And then everything above this is just, they built over it. So there wasn't any cleaning out of canals. It was a reconstruction he talked about. And the canals were much bigger, and something was going on. So I was looking at the work at the Price for 101 project, which was in the 1980s. And there was an individual that proposed that there was this mega flood that happened based off the deposits they were seeing. And so trying to understand what does this actually mean, I found information about a flood. It was the largest historic flood. It was 1891. This thing was, so this right here, this gray area shows the known extent of the 1891 flood. It happened in February. So this is before the Roosevelt Dam existed. This is before any dams existed. This is during the flood. This is the original railroad bridge across the Salt River. This got knocked out shortly after this photo was taken. They were cut off for a month. You would think that they would be completely cut off, and it talks about how bad it was because in order to get elsewhere, you had to go north of the river, and then you could go to Los Angeles or other places because the railroad was to the north. But they had telegraph service, and the railroad was back up in a couple of months. So it was a pretty major destructive flood. You can see right here, this is the bridge that replaced it. This is the shallow end of the bridge, and it was 12 feet. So this water crested 12 feet. This is a map from the late 1800s of Phoenix. What I'm showing here is this is the extent of that flood. That flood extended 2 to 3 miles away from the riverbed. This is the Diamondback Stadium. This is Suns Arena. This is the Hotel San Carlos. So at Monroe and Central, the waters were going. The way I know that is this was a schoolhouse that was there, and the kids were trapped on the second floor during that flood. They had to be rescued by boat. And that was a common occurrence that people were on tops of their houses because they were caught completely off guard with this flood. People that were living closer to the river, there was no estimate on how many people actually died, but multiple people died. You had irrigation, you had canals that were rupturing. The reason that this went up so far is the water followed old canals, but more importantly, it followed streets. So the streets became canals. So this thing was extremely destructive, and it reshaped how people kind of viewed what was going on with the flooding. Shortly after this is when you have a real push by what became the Salt River Project to get Roosevelt Dam built. It wasn't the fact that there wasn't enough water, which there isn't. It was the fact of flooding. Flooding was the most destructive thing that impacted everything, because when flooding happens, your gates go out and your canals rupture. That means you have to fix them before you can grow. And depending on when that is, you may not have enough time to grow your crops, and then you starve for a year. So going back to this illustration that I had here, again, this gray area is 1891 flood. The estimates for this extremely large flood, which seems to have happened around AD 800, is where this red star was, or is. You're looking at a peak flow of 400 to 450,000 cubic feet per second, instead of, this was 300,000 cubic feet per second. So you're looking at a flood on a scale that we've never seen. Nobody historically has ever seen a flood, at least since the 1800s. Nobody's seen a flood that big. Given what we saw with the destruction and the canals rupturing and other things, it's likely that happened during this flood to a greater degree. Because if I go back, before the flood, the canals were like this. You have the small, I mean, it's a couple, and they're pretty long, and a smaller one up here, and you have the canal system too. This is after the flood. You have these massive systems. Not only do you have massive systems, you have Scottsdale system where they move all the irrigation off the floodplain and onto the upper terrace, and they move their head gates 2 to 3 miles upriver. You have the Riverview system, which goes through Riverview Park, it's named after that. And again, they move their head gates from up here downriver. So they're completely reorganizing, completely reconstructing their irrigation systems. You have the Crisman system that really develops, and then Canal System 2. The north and south extent was set during the colonial, so it seems like it was positioned in a better spot. Again, there is a bedrock reef right here, so there was times likely when Canal System 2 was getting water that others may not have been. That's something I looked at within my dissertation work, and it's something I won't talk. It's a different discussion than tonight. The short synopsis of it is there's always enough water, it seems like, based off the amount of people and based off the amount of land that need to be irrigated. But basically, you're looking at this huge expansion of irrigation that was not really predicted. If you think back to the canals before this, they were much smaller than this. This is also the time that you have the ball courts growing everywhere across Arizona, well, at least southern and central Arizona, and you have the marketplace system. And so you're seeing a fundamental change that perhaps this was part of this larger change going on, and it's just, this flood may be perhaps a major part of a chapter in this history. So going into the early classic period, you have a much bigger, these are bigger systems. For the most part, there's no new systems except for the U-956 system. There's a question of how big this actually is because we don't have many dates for this. We have a few cuts, but how big this is, there haven't been many CRM excavations out here, which is where the majority of my data comes from. And so I had to use aerial photos and available data to kind of reconstruct this. But there was something going on because there were people living at U-956 ASM at that time. And one thing about living in the desert is you have to have some kind of water source. And so it must have been a canal being out here. I mean, there was a mesquite bosque out here. It was recorded. But for the most part, it seems like canals were coming out here. You have Canal System 2 up here, and it's really the full thing that we know. Sudavaki at the head gates, La Ciudad and Las Colinas near the tail. And so it's just a much bigger system. But there's a real question of what's going on between the Lehigh system, which is up here. There's this really question of, we are on a river terrace up here, and we're above the Lehigh. We're on the Mesa Terrace, and below is the Lehigh Terrace. So water can't flow uphill, as I was told multiple times. So somehow they got water up onto a river terrace. As it turns out, there is, not far from the park of the canals, the lower terrace and the upper terrace actually meet. And so that's probably where they took the water up. So the question of what's going on with the Lehigh system is also, Casa de Mesa may have been around during this time. We have a few sures that seem that people are still living here. There was an early platform mound that seemed to be there. But by and large, people had moved from kind of all over here all along this terrace edge right here. It doesn't seem like people were living much out here. So kind of looking at what are the timings of these irrigation systems, you have the U956 system come online. So something that I've been playing around with or trying to like really understand the relationship is perhaps the Lehigh system, the people that were in the Lehigh system moved over to U956 because it was in a better spot than on the Lehigh Terrace, and there's some other reasons which I can't get into. It's beyond the limits of this talk. Oh, this I'm just showing here. This is Compound B from Casa Grande. These are beginnings of real platform mounds. It's not the Sudabake platform mound, but we're getting there. So then you get into Lake Classic. It seems that Lehigh system's completely gone. And you have Chrisman system continuing on, you have the Coyote system, so on and so forth. And this appears at U956 because U956, the village, was one of the largest villages around. One of the reasons why, so in 1886, or late 1880s, the Hemingway expedition came to Phoenix trying to collect up as much as they could and send it back to the East Coast. And Frank Cushing was brought, he said, oh, I want to see all these great places, and he was brought to U956 because it was the largest of the villages. So you're looking at one of the largest villages in the valley being located one of the furthest away from the river. So this system seemed to be pretty massive. And it seems that they may have been doing irrigation over in the Riverview system as well. There is clear differences between these canals that I was able to see on aerial photographs. But for the most part, they're just very, very large systems. So this gets into when did large-scale irrigation cease in the valley? And I use this word cease rather than collapse intentionally because, yes, collapse is a way that you can describe a system going away, irrigation going away. Large-scale irrigation, yes, it's true, it stopped being practiced along the Lower Salt River after this time. But that doesn't get at the point that people were still living in the area and it wasn't just a sudden thing. People think of collapse as a one-time event. What's going on here is not that. So by and large, we don't know when the Riverview system, the Scottsdale system, Chrisman system, and Coyote system cease operations. However, we do have a pretty good idea that Canal System 2 may have stopped operating in the late 1380s. There was work at Sudabake with the SkyTrain, and Gary Huckleberry, the geoarchaeologist, he ran optically stimulated luminescence dates, which what that does is it takes quartz crystals. When quartz crystals see sunlight, they release all their electrons. And when they get buried, they gobble up all the electrons they can get that's in the ground, and you shoot a laser at it, and it releases all the electrons, and the intensity of the light tells you how long it's been buried. It used to be 10,000 years. They're actually using it, they're pushing, I think, 100,000 years over in Europe and Africa. So based off of that, we see this episodic flooding, and this is one of the things that's about the late 1350s and on. You see this increase in episodic flooding. This is something that the Ancestral O'Odham had experienced throughout time. You can see with the reconstructed flows that every so often you get these exceptional floods, you get 14-year floods, you get yearly floods, and so on and so forth. And so it was an expected thing. It's not great, but you can deal with it. Or they dealt with it and successfully. But in the late 1380s, you see this one flood, they rebuild. Another flood, they rebuild. Third flood, they don't rebuild this major irrigation system or major main canal. And it doesn't seem that they rebuilt any other canals. So it seems that by 1390, Canal System 2 may have gone out of operation. So getting into the U956 system, we have a pretty good idea that it went late. It may have been one of the latest systems in operation. Reason being is you have cliff polychrome, which is a very late slaughter polychrome. Glyph polychrome begins production in 1360, 1370. So we know that and these were found at U956. It was also found at Shidog, Muval, Vaki, because we looked at the ceramics from the platform mound. So we know that these couldn't have gotten there before really 1360, 1370. So the irrigation system had to still be operating. Found this at Shidog, Muval, Vaki, what has been known as Los Muertos polychrome or Perimesa polychrome, Las Colinas polychrome, and so on and so forth. The definitive part or characteristic of this is the use of red lines within the design. You don't get red used within these designs until this point. This type of pottery doesn't get made until 1390. So in order for this to be there, these systems, at least this system had to be operating until 1390, if not later. So you're looking at large-scale irrigation going way, way longer than people thought. And what's more important is these other systems may have gone out of use, but people were still living here, people were still irrigating. So this whole idea of a collapse just doesn't fit what we actually see. Probably what was going on is, yes, there is a population decrease, but people are moving around. They've moved around forever. They probably moved down the Gila River. So we get into kind of the end of continual occupation. And there's the idea of habitation and settlement and other things that you have to have people there. They have to have villages and things like that. That's just not how things necessarily work. And so we know people are still coming up here through time. But looking at dates that we have, there's a period, it's sometimes called post-classic, the proto-historic, kind of between 1450 and when the Spaniards get here. And so that's the critique of using proto-historic, is it's not an internal thing, it's an external thing that's exerted on people, that people didn't change just because the Spaniards were coming around until they actually got here. So kind of the indicators are, you see a return to pit houses. Right here, this is one of the platform mounds at Las Colinas, and you have pit houses being dug through compound walls. You have that at Casa Grande Compound F. These walls are this thick and 6 feet high. It may have been shorter at the time, but they're using digging sticks to dig through these compound walls. So it's an effort, and they're coming after. Same thing, you have a pit house that's put on top of the platform mount after it seems that the platform mount is no longer used for ceremonial purposes as it was before. Interesting, you get this assortment of pottery that seems to be happening. You have Lower Colorado buffware from the Lower Colorado, sometimes known as Battalion area. Jodo yellowwares, which wasn't there. You see them in the Phoenix Basin, but at these really late sites, you see more than you do at the kind of earlier classic sites. And then there's this late Tanky Birdie red on brown that we saw at Casa Grande Community National Monument. These things are being made, or at least this pottery is being made post 1300. And before it was made in Tucson, based off of sourcing, these things, the pottery is being made in the Phoenix area. So all the years up to this, you have red on buff pottery, and then suddenly around 1300 later, you have red on brown pottery being made. The designs are very similar to what was being put onto red on buff pottery, but it's on a brown body essentially. They're not making buffware anymore as far as the paint or the clay goes. So looking at, these are the sites that have been associated with the Polverone phase or this post-classic phase. Also with the irrigation, it's hard to really tell. They may have been reusing canals if they could, but it may have, what I think they reverted back, or not reverted, they started irrigating at the family level. So you don't need huge irrigation systems if you don't have a lot of people. You have a huge irrigation system because you have a lot of people. So that doesn't mean that large-scale irrigation is better than anything else. It's just, it meets a need. And so with not a lot of people being here, they didn't need a large irrigation system. So it seems that the lifestyles are very similar to the early Pioneer. As far as dates, it seems that you have an earlier, this is archaeomagnetic dating, and then C14. It seems that there's a first wave in the late 1350s up to 1450, and then a later wave in the 1500s. So this is showing that people are definitely still here. We have pretty good chronological dates that people were still in this area. It was not depopulated. The Hohokam did not disappear. People did not disappear. They're still in the area. They're just doing different things. This is the site of Sakate. It's on the Gila River Indian community. It is a site that, or a settlement that there is no Hohokam component to it. There's a few Hohokam sherds. It's all post 1350. It's all within the supposed protohistoric time. Father Kino, who came up here, he was one of the first Spaniards really up in this area in 1692. He saw this village. And the size of it and kind of the extent of crop growing and everything else, the cultural resource management program down at Gila River Indian community is pretty sure that this village was not there right before Kino got there. So this village did not just pop up when Kino appeared. This village had been there much longer. So this is one of the few sites that we have right now. There's more on GRIC, or Gila River Indian Community, that seems to be bridging this time. We now have canals that have been, again, dated with optically stimulated luminescence that seems to be bridging this time. This is exciting new information or new data that's coming out of the Gila River. And that's where I'm expecting kind of this bridge point. So again, yes, is large-scale irrigation not happening? It is not. But that's not the same thing that the people that irrigated, their grandparents irrigated and so on and so forth, they're still around. They're just doing different things. So now, kind of looking at kind of transitioning, and this is more toward getting to what I'm doing now. When I was working on my research, this was the common model for irrigation. You have a main canal, a branch canal, and then field turnouts, or distribution canals. And so it's a very linear system, and it was an interesting argument, but I felt like there wasn't much going for it because you have this. Archaeologists knew about this web system, so it's first identified by an ADOT archaeologist, or Arizona Department of Transportation archaeologist, Herskovitz, in the 1970s, and then later Bruce Massey kind of put this all together, that this is what he called the spider web effect of canals, or canal systems with, you have fields right here, and then you have distribution canal, or not branch canals, then lateral canals out to fields. So they only saw it within this I-10 freeway based off of one series of photos. The Maricopa County Flood Control District there was in control of these wonderful aerial photographs from 1930 until present. It's now just Maricopa County. You can go on and find these photographs. This is near Fiesta Mall. These are all Ancestral O'Odham canals. You can see them. Black and white photos are much better than color photos because you can see the contrast. Briefly, the reason that this is happening is because these fields flooded for irrigation, and then water stays within where the canals were longer than the size. So basically, water continues to flow through the canals even though they're buried. So that way you can actually see them. So what was interesting is I saw this all over the valley within these photographs. So it wasn't like this was happening. It was probably more similar to this that they had found in the 1970s. So this is at the SkyTrain. These canal systems, so before we didn't actually have data to actually, or excavation data actually support that these field systems were real. During the SkyTrain excavation, they found the fields, and it was exactly what you're seeing in the aerial photographs. You have this branch canal, and then going out to laterals, and you have these primary laterals and secondary laterals going out to fields. That's dating to about AD 1000, 1100. Unfortunately, we don't have any earlier dated canals. There are dated canals along the South Mountain 202 project, but those are still coming out. The reports are still coming out for that. This is Las Capas, and this is down in Tucson. these fields date this or predate this by 2,000 years. So you're looking at 2 millennia almost before here. So this has led me to believe that this whole idea or this thought of how you do irrigation, it's going way back in time. So at least what I call the standard irrigation units. This highly interconnected field systems, those are super ancient and they may predate irrigation here. So whenever it started here, it seems that these irrigation units were there. And so this is kind of a stylized version. This is from north of the river, or south, same area. So you have a primary canal or a main canal going out to bifurcating into branch canals, and then you have a primary lateral, secondary lateral, and going out to fields. I'm writing an article for an antiquities article, and so I'm surveying irrigation from around the world to understand management, and I'll get to that in a minute. There are fields in Saudi Arabia or the Middle East and other places like Mesopotamia. They look like this. So it's not happening just here. It seems that this idea of how you do a field grid system is something that people all over the world came to that conclusion. Okay, so this is where you get to interact. So I will put up the QR code in a second. I didn't want people to get really happy and start doing things before I give the instructions. So it'll be there in a second. So we're going to play a game. It's an irrigation collective action problem game. So as you'll access a Slido poll with the QR code that will pop up, you'll need your smartphone camera to get to it. So you will get to this screen right here when you actually get into it. You're not downloading anything. You're not signing in for anything or anything like that. The only thing I would like you to do is there's a part where it says voting as, it's anonymous right now. I'd like you to put your name, at least your first name and last initial or something like that, because it plays into the prizes I have. So the background of this is everyone here today is part of the AZMNH irrigation system. There is less water in the river than normal, so you must make a choice about how much water you will use to water your crops. Your choices are share water equally so everybody gets some, but part of your crops will die. Take as much water as you can, and all your crops will live, but everybody else will lose most of their crops and go hungry the next year. The rule, you cannot talk to anybody. You have to make the decision on your own. The reward, because there's always rewards. If everybody decides to share, or select share, then everybody gets one of these nifty coasters. Yep, no. One of our branded coasters. If one person decides to take all the water that it can and everybody else shares, then that one person gets this branded first aid kit. Everybody else gets nothing. However, if more than one person decides to take everything, everybody gets nothing. It's called a prisoner's dilemma game. So, how do you think you all did? Who really wants the first aid kit? Okay. I'll turn on. Oh, somebody. Let me see if I can get, let's see. I can actually get it to the, all right, I can't. All right. Who voted to take it all? Congratulations, you get the first aid kit. Everybody else gets nothing. Oh. Worried about the mob. All right. On the way out, I'll hand out everybody's coasters. And sometimes, so I do this with students, and I do extra credit. And normally, more than one person takes it all, and so they all get no credit, but then they start worrying about that, and they get something. But they've done these types of games around the world with different farmers, and they find that when you can't communicate with each other, people will tend to do what's best for them. They have an idea of that they need to care for their community, but one of the largest complaints that you get from farmers within the ethnic, or at least historical records, is everybody's stealing your water. Your neighbor's stealing more water than you, and you try to take as much water as you can before your neighbors notice they're taking more water. So it's just kind of this balance. Okay, so kind of getting into where I'm doing now. This is something called an institutional approach toward irrigation. This is something, the Common Pool resource, if you ever heard of Tragedy of the Commons, that was put out in the 1970s, that's where this idea comes from. So you have things that are subtracted, you can subtract from it, so like water. There's only so much water in a river. And so you can take, the more people take from it, the less there is, or gold deposits. The more you take from it, the less there is, or oil or whatever. Then you have non-subtractive, so something that benefits everybody. Whereas costly to extract, or exclude, if everybody's trying to steal the water, take it, you can't go after everybody, so the amount of effort you'd have to do to keep people out of your irrigation system is high, unless you have multiple people to do it. And then not costly to exclude. So things that are subtractive and costly to exclude is irrigation. It's a common pool resource. And yes, it is coming from one source, but people within earthen canals, they could break off, kind of do their own canal and break part of the canal edge of it and go into their fields. So there's ways around it. You have non-subtractive consumption where city roads are, the road's always there. It doesn't matter how many people are there, it's still there. I mean, you get congestion and traffic and everything, but it's still there. Private goods, it's not costly to exclude, and it's subtractive. So bread or food, you can keep people away from eating your bread. And versus toll goods, everybody can do it, but it's not costly to exclude. So like Amazon or any of your streaming services. So that's a basic framework of this. So this idea of something that's subtractive and costly to exclude leads to something that was put together or theorized mostly by Eleanor Ostrom. So long-lived institutions, they have clearly defined boundaries, so it tells you who your members are. You have, and who can be part of that, because not everybody can be a part of an irrigation system. You have resource sharing rules, so water allocation. Not everybody can distribute water onto their land at the same time. So you have to have scheduling. And scheduling is documented among Spanish systems, and you have a court system, which is what gets to this conflict resolution. User participation, where you have members overseeing the rules and can change them, and they're in the roles of overseeing different things. Monitoring, make sure people are not stealing more water than they need to, and that they are giving their labor in order to get the benefit of the water. You have graduated sanctions, where the punishment fits the severity. So offing somebody because they stole a little water, that seems a bit extreme. If it's only a little bit, and everybody the totality of it is not that big. And then finally, conflict resolution. So people are there to mediate conflicts. Like I said, in Spain and Valencia, you have these water courts that go into the 15, even 1200s. They've been long-lived. I give this example. Salt River Project has all these. And depending on how you view your bill rates and all that, and how you feel like you can actually interact with them, they do have public meetings. They're semi-governmental. But things like scheduling your water, and who can participate, and clearly defined boundary, either you're in the SRP water area or you're not, and so forth. So kind of the modern example would be SRP in the valley. So then if we apply that in the past, you look at kind of some of the irrigation tasks, and I won't go through each one of these given time, but you have all these things that have to be done. And if you look, going back to this illustration that I had, each one of these is a different task that people have to be involved with, from the very top of the system all the way down to the field level or groups of fields. So there has to be somebody that's organizing that, and it has to have some kind of system to it. So in sum, the Ancestral O'Odham canals are a record of decisions made over generations of farmer, because no one farmer 1 year can do everything. The huge systems that I showed you before, that didn't happen overnight. That happened over generations of building upon, building upon, building upon. As I've heard, the valley is a palimpsest of history. Basically, you would have the old riding paths that you scrape off clean, but the indentations are still there. So in the valley, it's the same way. The irrigation systems were built over time, so it exceeds any one person, and so it's a collective record of what people did in the past. You have the origins of standard irrigation units likely predating current archaeological evidence along the Salt River. So like I said, even though the earliest standard irrigation units date to about 1,000, given Tucson having them 2,000 years before that, that's that way, and it's not great here, but you can see these highly integrated, highly web-like canal systems that probably goes from the very beginning here. Looking at an institutional approach to studying archaeology makes it possible to understand how irrigation was so successful along the lower Salt Rivers for so long. And so that's something that archaeologists have gotten tripped on. Archaeologists like the sexy of things are changing. You can see things when they're changing. Continuity through time is not something that attracts them because it's the same, it's boring to them. However, you're having irrigation from the Hohokam cultural sequence for a millennia. That's successful. Things just change. Like I said, if you go back to the post-classic period, yes, there's no large-scale irrigation system, but that system had lasted, again, for 1,000 years. And people continued on after that. And I'm getting here, very large and complex systems do not, rewinding. Just because you don't have large irrigation systems doesn't mean it's not successful, and that's basically the idea of collapse just doesn't make sense. Things change. And finally, very large and complex systems do not need a central political authority. That's something that was very hot within archaeology. They had to have these elites, like you think of the Maya. You have these Maya rulers, and you had to have rulers. Well, we don't have evidence of that here. You have these. This is among the largest irrigation networks of irrigation systems in the pre-industrial world. That's rivaling Mesopotamia, the Nile, and down into Peru, which are some of the largest. Supposedly, you have to have these really strong elites or strong kings and queens and so on. Don't have that here. So what this is showing is very large, complex systems can exist without royalty, essentially. But kind of my last piece here is in getting to the theme of this series of Thrive. Again, people irrigated here for 1,000 years very successfully. You have a major, extremely large flood that basically wiped out all irrigation. They rebuilt from it. The large-scale irrigation went down over time, but people were still around, and they probably went to the Middle Gila River, among other places. And so the idea that the Hohokam disappeared and they're lost people and all that, that's essentially garbage. And so kind of looking at incorporating what descendant communities have been talking about the entire time, that they're still here. And that's what the archaeological record is showing now. Thank you.
We have 5 minutes for questions and answers. Yeah, Gavin, you want to use the microphone?
I guess. Hey, great presentation. I've got a question about water storage. Did they tend to store the water within the canals that were like gated on either end of the small canals, or were there large reservoirs that they would share or use?
Yeah, so that was one thought, because within the large canals, you have these really thick clay deposits. And in order for clay to deposit itself, the water has to be still. So there may have been some water storage within the irrigation or within the canals themselves, but there were reservoirs here. At Los Colinas, there was at least 2. And then all around the valley, and then going all the way down into southern part of Arizona, there's reservoirs all the time, all over the place, Queen Creek and all that. So it just wasn't appreciated by archaeologists, given where CRM projects were. They just didn't see the reservoirs at the time, but they're definitely there, and they were definitely storing water.
My geography is not great. Did those come from the Colorado River?
No, they feed into the Colorado River. So we are in the Colorado River watershed. The Salt River heads or starts in the White Mountains, and then the Verde is up near Payson or Flagstaff, I mean.
So if people are criticizing like our thousands of years old systems because it's like taking from the Colorado River, that's not true.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is the Central Arizona Project.
Okay.
Pumps water from the Colorado River here.
Okay.
So like APS has cap water, and so there's a certain allocation of cap water. And so that's where kind of the confusion happens from, is because of that project and trying to bring more water to the valley. You do have Colorado River, but the Salt River and the Verde River, the Gila River, those don't take water from the Colorado River. They contribute water to the Colorado River.
Interesting. Thank you.
You have such a large, complex irrigation system.
Mm-hmm.
Did that help mediate the flooding because they were taking so much water out that it would...
Probably not, because in the early 1800s, before the dam, the way the Euro-Americans were irrigating was not that different from Ancestral O'Odham. They had brush wares, so dams putting water in. They have earthen canals. You don't get concrete until a little bit later, like 1900-ish. And so the canals that you see in the late 1800s, they were getting blown out all the time. So every 2 years, you would have a pretty big flood where you have to reconstruct your dam. And then every 14 years, you'd have floods that would destroy the beginnings of your main canal. And you have to reconstruct your main canal.
Were they using, I mean, in the 1890s, were they using as much retention of water, like reservoirs and stuff, as the...
As far as I know, no. They were relying completely on the Salt River for that.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris.
Hi, Jacob.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that we never left. We're still here. So my name is Jacob Butler. I'm one of the members of Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. I just wanted to come and say thank you for your presentation. And these are two knowledge keepers right here, and I just really appreciate the information that you had to share tonight. I also wanted to ask you, though, so with the canal systems, the canal systems were very vast. But even though they had this canal system in place and farming was it was a major part of our society at the time, it still only constituted 40% of our diet. 60% came from the desert and the riparian area. So at the times where when you say, some of these things would happen, there was still staples that would sustain the people, like the bosques or the thickets with the mesquite. It's a carb and a protein. But even with all that, there's still evidence that the people did go through major famines, right? And that they were malnourished at certain points. But I thought it was surprising that a lot of the things that aren't offered in the field are found in the desert. So a lot of the minerals and vitamins that aren't found there, calcium, potassium, things like that, are found in the desert. And to me, it's an awesome understanding of the lexicon that we once engaged in. But this is an awesome presentation. I just appreciate being here. So thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, you bring up a huge blind spot for archaeology and archaeologists, that there's a vast amount of food that archaeologists ignore. You have Husky, Shasma, that has gotten into some of the traditional foods, trying to put that into the archaeological record. But because CRM projects and Ancestral O'Odham within the valley is very tied to CRM, cultural resource management projects, you're not seeing these full idea or the full breadbasket that there was within the valley. But this idea that we live in a barren desert is just not correct. The Sonoran Desert is one of the most bountiful deserts in the world. You have a greater diversity of plants and animals than any other desert in the world. And so having a very myopic or very small view that irrigation is everything, it's wrong. And yeah, I did my dissertation on irrigation, and that's what I study. But that's only one part of it. You have people living up in Roosevelt Lake. You have people living in Payson. They're not irrigating. They're doing something different. And even down in Tucson, the irrigation systems are much smaller. They're doing something else there. So you have people, a lot of people living in the southern part of the Arizona not doing irrigation in the size that we have here. So that's a part that is extremely understudied within the archaeological record, but is an extremely important part of why the Ancestral O'Odham were able to persist doing these large-scale irrigations for over 1,000 years and continue on after that. Again, the irrigation systems collapsed, quote-unquote collapsed. People were still around. It's not like everybody died. And so it's not the end-all, be-all. It's just one way of doing things.
What were the head gates made from?
Thank you, Mrs. Lawley. They were probably ironwood trees, some kind of stump or a trunk of a tree, and then in between it you have wicker work, and then in between there you have cobbles put in. So it's kind of a wicker work thing. It's a sandwich with cobbles, and then dirt on the interior side, and just kind of a wicker work. The wear gates were brush and basically everything interweaving to allow water to get into the canals themselves. It wasn't like you have head gates now, or the gates now, where you have metal and you pulled up, but it was something that they had to physically move things to actually open up the gates.
Okay, well, I think that's it. Thank you again, Chris. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.